So today I'm going to show you how to make a gluten-free chicken Kiev. Chicken Kiev is a wonderful classical dish which essentially is a chicken breast that is coated in breadcrumbs and stuffed with garlic butter, and then it is shallow fried and then baked in the oven. And today we're going to do this for 2 people, and the ingredients we have on our counter, which I'm going to talk you through them. So for our garlic butter, we've got 60 grams of unsalted butter. We're going to use a little bit of lemon juice. We've got 2 fat cloves of garlic, and we've got some parsley which we're going to chop. For our breadcrumb coating, we've got 275 grams of gluten-free bread, which I'm going to dry in the oven to make it easier to make breadcrumbs. Then we're going to coat it with egg, and we also need to coat it with flour. This is of course gluten-free flour, 100 grams. We're going to season the flour with smoked paprika and salt and pepper, and of course our chicken breasts. So let's get started. So we've placed our 7 slices of gluten-free bread into a preheated oven set to 125 degrees Celsius, and we just want to dry out the bread without really colouring it, and we'll leave that there for about 15 to 20 minutes to help dry the bread out. In the meantime, we're going to make the garlic butter. In my little ramekin I have about 4 or 5 grams of flat parsley, and we're going to chop that, and then we're going to mix it into our butter and add our garlic and a little squeeze of lemon juice. Whenever I'm chopping parsley, the first thing I do is wash the parsley and then dry it and drain it to make sure there's no grit or sand in the parsley. Just keep bringing the parsley back together. Check from another direction. You want it quite fine when you're doing something like chicken Kiev. Right, that's good enough. So now we've got our parsley chopped up, the next thing we'll do is chop our 2 big cloves of garlic. So we want this garlic to be really quite fine. So just bring the garlic back together. And keep chopping it till it's really fine, because you want this to really mix in well with the butter. Right, I think that's good enough. So we've got our garlic chopped, we've got our parsley chopped. Now we're going to bring 60 grams of butter, and we're going to work it with a fork just to soften it up a little bit, and then we're going to stir in the garlic and the parsley. So I've mashed my parsley and my garlic into the butter. You don't need to work it too hard, you don't really want to make it too soft because we want it to chill down again. We're just going to add a little bit of lemon juice, and literally just a little squeeze from this half lemon. Obviously make sure we don't get any pips in it. Just a little squeeze of lemon juice, that's enough. And we're just going to turn that over just to get that lemon flavour into the butter. I don't like using salted butter because it's too salty, but I do like to add a little salt back into it to give flavour, and some black pepper. So now our butter is ready to shape. So we have piece of baking parchment and greaseproof paper, and we're just going to put our butter onto our baking parchment, and we want to shape it into a sausage shape. So we want to shape this into a little small sausage. So the first thing we do is just shape it on the outside of the paper. And then we want to roll it a little bit. We want to twist the ends to make it nice and tight. So we will twist the ends, not too tight in the first place, and twist the other end. And you want to squeeze it in to make like a fat sausage. Okay, and now that's ready to go into the fridge. So my gluten-free bread has been in the oven at 125 degrees for about 20 minutes. After about 10 minutes I did turn it over to make sure that it gets evenly dried out. Now you can see there's no real colour on the bread, but it is now much drier, and therefore it'll be easier to put in a food processor to make breadcrumbs. So I'm just going to tear these up into pieces. And we think we'll do about 3 or 4 slices and see how that goes. Make that into breadcrumbs and then take that out and do the process again. So we think the breadcrumbs should be dry enough and fine enough by now. So you really want it as fine as you can get it. Of course, how stale your bread is, how dry your bread is, will make a big difference to how long this takes, but you really need it to be nice and fine. So now we're going to show you how to prepare the chicken. Now these chicken breasts are a little bit larger than I want. I usually want a maximum of about 8 ounces per chicken breast. These are about 8.5. So they could do with being a little smaller, but they are. You don't want, on the other hand, you don't want less than 6 ounces. Ideally somewhere between 7 to 7.5 to 8 maximum of your raw chicken. Right, so let's have a look at what we've got here. Every chicken breast has a fillet. A little fillet on the underside if it's complete. So we're going to take that fillet out. And we're also going to trim off a little bit of the sinew that's on the side here with a sharp knife, of course. Now this is the thickest side of the chicken, so we're going to create a little bit of a pocket. And you want to make sure that your knife is horizontal so that you don't dig through the chicken and make a hole. And you want to make this pocket quite big. Okay, so that's the first part of it. Make it maybe just a tiny bit bigger. Okay, so that's chicken breast number 1. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to cover the chicken fillet with a little bit of cling film, and we need something heavy, ideally something like a meat bat like this. And we just need to bat that out. And the fillet is going to help to hold the butter in place. So just gently bat it out. And again, you want the force to be even so that you don't make holes in the fillet. And you want to make it quite big, so it ends up about 2.5 times the size it was before we started. So my butter has been in the fridge. In fact, it's perfectly fine if you want to put the butter in the freezer to quicken up the process. It needs to be nice and hard before we cut it into slices to fill the chicken up with. So we will first unwrap it like a sweet to get the paper out of the way so that the paper doesn't get trapped when you're cutting it and end up with paper in your chicken Kiev, which of course you don't want to do. I've got a long, thin carving knife for this. And I want to just make some gentle slices down. You could warm your knife up just a little bit if you want with some hot water. But I want to try to keep the butter quite cold when it goes into the chicken. And the reason you want really cold butter when it goes into the chicken is you don't want the butter melting as soon as you start that cooking process. I'm probably only going to use 2 pieces of butter per chicken breast, but I wanted to cut it all up and use the best 4. So now we're going to place 2 of our butter discs on the chicken. Then we're going to put our chicken fillet over the top to cover it, and then we're going to bring this flap back over to cover the chicken so it's nice and plump and that the butter is held carefully in place. Really simple, and we're going to repeat that process with the other chicken breast, and then we're going to chill them down for about half an hour before we breadcrumb them. So whilst the chicken breasts are chilling down in the fridge, we're going to get together our flour, egg and breadcrumbs ready to coat the chicken. And I want to tell you about this whole process because there is an art to this. First we're going to season our flour, because that's really quite important, and we're going to put some smoked paprika, about half a teaspoon, into the flour. We'll give that a good stir in. And then we want to add some salt and pepper. We want to add enough so we can taste the salt and the pepper in the flour, because you can't really season the chicken once it's breadcrumbed. So we really need to season the breadcrumbs. In this second one we're going to put the egg, but I'll put a little splash of milk. The milk, sometimes people use milk, sometimes people don't use milk. We're going to put an egg into that, and we're going to just whisk it up, and we need to beat it well so that the egg gets really well mixed. And 1 egg is absolutely tons for our coating process. We're going to season the egg with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and a tiny bit of the smoked paprika, just a little bit in there. Mix that in. Now we're ready to coat our chicken. Now this process of coating something in flour, egg and breadcrumbs, the French call pané. And the key to doing it well is not to get both of your hands into the egg and then into the breadcrumbs. So you want to try to keep one hand clean and just using the dry ingredients, the flour and the breadcrumbs, and the other hand for dipping the chicken or whatever you're breadcrumbing into the egg. And I'll show you how that's done. So now we're ready to pané our chicken Kiev. So we'll gently pick up one of the chicken breasts and we're going to dust it with the flour. Make sure we get the flour on all sides of the chicken. Make sure, because the flour will help the egg and the breadcrumbs to stick, so it's very important that we get plenty of flour on there, but also that we dust the excess off. And for this part of the process you just can use both hands. So, okay, now we're going to put it into the egg. And remember what I said, you only want to have one hand into the egg, but you need to make sure that the chicken gets completely coated with the egg. So I'm going to turn the chicken over in the egg, and now I'm going to take it out. And I want to make sure that I'm not dripping lots and lots of egg onto the breadcrumbs, otherwise I'll make my breadcrumbs really clumpy. We'll drop it into the breadcrumbs. Now we're going to use our dry hand put the breadcrumbs onto the chicken so that the dry hand stays dry. Pat it around, turn it over, and we will probably repeat the process and give it a second coating to help keep it nice and crisp. So we've got that one done there, and we will now repeat the process. So here we go with the second coat. I've got the first of the two chicken breasts into the flour. Now it doesn't need so much flour this time because obviously it's already got breadcrumbs on there, and so therefore not much flour will adhere to it. And then you've got to put it carefully into your egg. Remember what I said about the egg. Make sure the egg is completely over all of the chicken, but you don't want to leave it in there very long because otherwise it'll sort of soak and wash all your breadcrumbs off. And remember, when we put it into the breadcrumbs, we want to let most of the egg drip off, lay it down, and then we want to make sure we coat it well with our dry hand to make sure that it's really well coated in the breadcrumbs. And we'll repeat the same process with the other chicken breast. So we've now got our second coating of breadcrumbs, egg and flour onto our chicken Kievs. We now need to let them chill down for about 20 minutes before we try to cook them. So I have a large frying pan. I've got it on a medium-high heat, and we're going to put at least 4 good tablespoons, and I am using cold pressed rapeseed oil, which is really, really good. 2, 3, 4. So we want to make sure this is hot before we put our chicken in. So we're going to let it sit there for a minute too. When we see a little haze coming from the oil, we know it's hot enough to put the chicken in, but we don't want it smoking. If you're not sure whether it's hot enough, one of the checks you can do is just drop a few of the breadcrumbs in. They're coming straight to the surface, so you know that the pan is hot enough. We'll gently lay the 2 chicken into the pan. You can kind of just shake off the excess of the breadcrumbs as you're laying them in, and you just want to turn them once, and once they're golden brown, then we're going to put them into the oven and cook them for about 20 minutes. Now the oven needs to be preheated to 170 degrees Celsius. That's if it's a fan assisted oven, and 180 if it's not a fan assisted oven. It's also important to have a thermometer because we need to check the internal temperature to make sure the chicken reaches 75 degrees before we serve it. So making the chicken brown on the outside doesn't take very long at all. So you can see these have only been in the pan 2 or 3 minutes, and they're already got a nice colour to them. Of course they still need a lot more cooking, but we don't want them to brown or burn in the frying pan. So we're going to leave them now another 3 to 4 minutes on that side. Make sure that the temperature is only about medium heat. I've got it on about 6 to cook them, and then we'll transfer them to a non-stick baking tray to finish in the oven. So the chicken have been in the oven baking for 20 minutes, and they've reached 80 degrees Celsius, so we know they're absolutely cooked. The butter has leaked out just a little bit, but don't worry about that. There will still be some butter inside. Of course, if you're feeling brave, you can cut your chicken in half at an angle, and you can still see that there is still some pieces of butter inside your chicken, and it's perfectly cooked. Enjoy.